Welcome to another deep dive, everyone. Today, we're going to be tackling a topic that might sound kind of like it's from a sci-fi movie,
Oh, yeah.
but it's actually crucial to how businesses today protect their data.
Right.
DMZ networks. We've got some pretty technical source material here,
Mhm.
but we're going to break it down nice and easy so you can understand how DMZ's firewall security all work together.
Sounds good.
Think of it like we're protecting a castle,
Okay.
but instead of moats and drawbridges,
Oh,
we've
good
got
one.
digital barriers and defenses.
I like that analogy. Yeah, it's a good one. And just like with a castle, different levels of security are needed, depending on what exactly you're trying to protect.
Yeah.
Our source material actually defined the DMZ network as a buffer zone between the open internet and a company's private network.
Okay, so it's a zone between the public and the private networks.
Right.
But why not just build one giant wall around everything?
Yeah, good question.
Why even have a separate zone at all?
Well, think about it. Companies need to share some information publicly, like their website or email servers, for example.
Right.
But they also have super sensitive data
Right.
that needs to be locked down tight,
Uh-huh.
like financial records or customer information.
Yeah. Makes sense.
The DMZ lets them do both, allows controlled access to certain services while keeping the truly sensitive stuff isolated.
So it's like having a lobby in a bank.
Yes.
You can use the ATM or talk to a teller.
Exactly.
You can't just wander back into the vault where all the money's kept.
Exactly. It's all about controlled access. Now, typically, the servers you'll find in a DMZ are things like web servers, email servers, and DNS servers.
Okay.
Basically, anything that needs to be accessible from the outside world,
Gotcha.
but shouldn't have direct access to the core internal network.
That makes sense. So how do firewalls fit into all of this?
Oh yeah, they're essential.
Are they like the guards that patrol the DMZ?
Exactly. Firewalls are essential for controlling traffic flow in and out of the DMZ.
Okay.
The source material highlights two main types. Okay. External firewalls and internal firewalls.
Two layers of defense.
Yeah. It's like having multiple checkpoints
Okay.
in our castle analogy.
I like it.
The external firewall is your first line of defense, like the main gate to the castle.
Okay.
It scrutinizes all incoming traffic from the internet, blocks anything suspicious.
Uh-huh.
Then you have internal firewalls,
Okay.
which act like guards protecting specific areas within the castle.
Wait, so you're saying you need firewalls pointing both inward and outward?
Yes.
That's interesting. Why would you need protection from inside the network?
That's a really important point.
Mhm.
And this is where the concept of two-way protection comes in.
Mhm.
The DMZ needs to be protected not only from threats coming from the internet,
Yeah.
but also from potential issues arising within the internal network.
Okay.
Imagine if someone inside the castle, let's say a careless employee, accidentally clicks on a phishing link.
Oh, yeah.
The internal firewall helps contain that threat,
Okay.
preventing it from spreading to the DMZ or out to the wider internet.
That's fascinating. So even if one part of the network is compromised,
Right.
the damage is contained,
Yeah.
prevents attackers from reaching the most sensitive data.
Exactly.
Now, the source also mentions that internal firewalls can be used to further segment the internal network itself.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that a little?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Think of it this way. Even inside the castle, you might have different levels of security.
Sure.
You wouldn't want the kitchen staff wandering into the royal treasury.
Right, yeah.
Same concept with internal firewalls. They can be used to create even more granular security zones within the internal network,
Uh-huh.
restricting access to specific departments or resources based on need to know.
Yeah.
This helps prevent unauthorized access or data leaks, even from within the company itself.
Okay, so firewalls are clearly a critical piece of the puzzle.
For sure.
And speaking of puzzles, the source mentions something called the hub and spoke network model.
Yes.
What exactly is that?
This model helps visualize how firewalls control access within a network. Imagine a bicycle wheel. The hub is the central point of access, representing the DMZ in this case.
Gotcha.
The spokes are the various internal networks or departments trying to connect to the DMZ.
Okay.
Firewalls act as checkpoints along those spokes, filtering traffic, ensuring only authorized communication is allowed between the hub and each spoke.
So the firewall is like a traffic cop,
Yeah,
directing data where it needs to go and keeping things organized.
exactly.
Now, I'm guessing setting up these firewalls isn't as simple as just plugging them in.
No.
The source talks about firewall policies.
Yes.
What are those all about?
Think of firewall policies as the rule book for those traffic cops we just talked about.
Okay.
They dictate exactly how the firewalls should handle incoming and outgoing network traffic.
Okay.
These policies need to be incredibly detailed and based on a company's specific security goals.
So it's not just a matter of saying yes or no to traffic.
No.
These policies get really granular, right?
Absolutely.
What kind of things do they cover?
They can cover everything from specific IP addresses that are allowed or blocked to the types of applications and protocols that can communicate through the firewall. They can even filter traffic based on the content of the data being transmitted. For example, you might want to block downloads of certain file types.
Oh, wow.
Or prevent access to certain websites.
Wow, that is detailed. So it's like having a very comprehensive security checklist for every single piece of data that tries to pass through the firewall.
You got it.
Yeah.
And having these policies in place is critical for ensuring that your firewalls are actually doing their job.
Right.
It's not enough to just have the technology, but to configure it properly and tailor it to your specific security needs.
This is already making me think differently about network security. Before we dive deeper into the specifics of these policies, I want to make sure we're all clear on the basics of how firewalls actually work.
Sure.
I have a feeling a lot of people just assume they're these magical boxes that block all the bad stuff.
You're right. It's easy to take firewalls for granted. But understanding the mechanics behind them is essential for creating effective security policies. So let's take a closer look at how firewalls analyze traffic and make decisions about what to allow and what to block.
Perfect. Let's unpack that in part 2 of our deep dive. So how do these firewalls actually work?
Yeah, so let's lift the hood and see what makes firewalls tick. At their core, firewalls are all about analyzing network traffic.
Okay.
And then making decisions based on a set of rules. Think of it like a border crossing.
Okay.
Every piece of data trying to enter or leave the network has to go through inspection.
Okay, so every piece of data gets checked.
Right.
But how does the firewall actually do that? What's the inspection process like?
Well, firewalls operate at different levels in the network. Some firewalls look at the basic packet headers, which is like checking a package's shipping label. It tells you where it's coming from and where it's going.
Okay.
This is where things like IP addresses and port numbers come into play.
So the firewall can block traffic based on the origin or destination.
Exactly. And that's just the beginning. More advanced firewalls can actually look inside the data packets themselves.
Wow.
Examining the content to identify potential threats. This is called deep packet inspection.
Okay.
And it allows the firewall to block things like malware downloads or even specific keywords
Really?
associated with malicious activity.
Wow, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
So they're not just looking at the address label, they're actually reading the contents of the package.
Precisely. Now, remember those firewall policies we talked about?
Yeah.
This is where they come in. The policies define the specific rules that the firewall uses to make decisions about what to allow and what to block.
So the policies are essentially the firewall's instruction manual.
You got it. And these instructions can get very specific. For example, you can set rules to allow only certain types of traffic on specific ports,
Right.
or to block traffic from certain countries or IP addresses known for malicious activity.
Now, the source material specifically calls out 6 key recommendations for creating effective firewall policies.
Right.
Let's unpack those, starting with the first one. Blocking all traffic by default. That sounds pretty extreme.
It might seem that way, but it's actually a fundamental security principle.
Okay.
By blocking everything except what you explicitly allow, you minimize the risk of something slipping through the cracks. It's like having a locked door with a very selective guest list.
Okay.
Only those who are specifically invited are allowed in.
So it's a guilty until proven innocent approach to network traffic.
Exactly. And this brings us to the second recommendation, which is to carefully consider both the source and destination of traffic.
Okay.
You want to be very specific about which IP addresses or networks are allowed to communicate with your DMZ. Think about it. You wouldn't want to leave your castle gates open to just anyone, would you? You'd want to know who's coming and going and why.
Right, of course. Okay, so we're locking down who can talk to the DMZ. What's next on the list?
The source then emphasizes the need to pay attention to both IPv4 and IPv6 traffic.
Right.
You mentioned earlier that you weren't familiar with these terms.
Yeah.
They essentially refer to different addressing systems used to identify devices on a network.
Right, like a digital street address for each device.
Exactly.
But why is it so important to have policies for both IPv4 and IPv6?
Well, IPv4 is the older system. And while it's still widely used, it has some limitations, particularly when it comes to the number of available addresses. IPv6 was developed to address these limitations.
Okay.
And it's becoming increasingly common. The key takeaway here is that your firewall needs to be able to handle both types of traffic to ensure comprehensive protection.
So even though IPv6 is newer, we can't just ignore the older IPv4 traffic.
Exactly. Now, the next recommendation focuses on applications.
Okay.
The source advises creating a whitelist of applications that are specifically allowed to send or receive traffic through the firewall.
It's like that guest list analogy again, but this time for apps instead of people. Only the approved apps get to communicate with the outside world.
That's a great way to put it. And this leads us to the final two recommendations, which are really two sides of the same coin. First, you need to identify and record all the applications that legitimately need to communicate through the network. This might involve working with different departments to understand their specific needs and workflows.
So you're saying it requires a deep understanding of what's happening inside the network.
Yes.
Not just setting up the firewall and forgetting about it.
Absolutely. And then, based on that understanding, you create your whitelist, blocking traffic from any application that isn't on that list. Again, it's about minimizing the attack surface by being as restrictive as possible.
This whole approach to firewall policies really emphasizes the importance of being proactive, not reactive.
Right.
You're not just waiting for something bad to happen. You're actively trying to prevent it from happening in the first place.
That's the key to effective security.
Yeah.
Now, remember that question I posed earlier about cloud computing and how it impacts DMZs?
Yeah.
Well, this is where things get really interesting. With the rise of cloud services, the traditional model of a physical DMZ located within a company's own data center starts to blur.
Wait, so are you saying that DMZs are becoming obsolete?
Not at all. The concept of a DMZ is more relevant than ever, but its implementation is changing. Instead of physical hardware, we're now seeing virtual DMZs hosted in the cloud.
Okay, now I'm even more intrigued. Can you break that down a bit further?
Imagine a cloud provider like Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure.
Okay.
They offer a wide range of services, including virtual servers, databases, and networking tools. You can use these tools to create a virtual DMZ that functions much like a traditional DMZ, but with the flexibility and scalability of the cloud.
So instead of having a separate physical space for your DMZ, you're creating a virtual space within the cloud environment.
Precisely. And this brings a whole new set of advantages and challenges. On the one hand, you have incredible flexibility. You can spin up new servers and configure your virtual DMZ on the fly, adapting to changing needs.
That sounds amazing. No more waiting weeks or months to set up new hardware.
Exactly. And cloud providers often offer robust security features that can enhance your DMZ's defenses. But on the other hand, you're also relying on the cloud provider's security practices and infrastructure.
So it's like trusting the security of your virtual castle to the cloud provider's knights and archers.
That's a great analogy. And this raises a whole host of questions about trust, transparency, and shared responsibility. How do you ensure that your data is safe in the cloud? How do you monitor and audit the cloud provider's security practices?
These are some serious questions. I can see why cloud-based DMZs present both opportunities and challenges.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this topic so fascinating. It's not just about the technology itself, but about the broader implications for security, privacy, and trust in the digital age.
It's like a whole new world of cybersecurity is opening up before our eyes.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it's a world that's constantly evolving. What's considered best practice today might be outdated tomorrow. That's why it's so important to stay informed, stay curious, and never stop learning.
I completely agree. This has been an incredible deep dive. We've gone from the basics of DMZs and firewalls to the cutting edge of cloud security.
It's amazing.
And I feel like I've learned a ton along the way.
Man.
What an amazing journey.
I'm glad to hear that. I hope our listeners feel the same way.
So for all of our listeners out there who are maybe feeling a little overwhelmed by all of this, the DMZs, the firewalls, this constantly changing landscape of cybersecurity, what's the one key takeaway you want them to remember from all of this?
That's a great question. If I had to boil it all down to one thing, I would say security is a journey, not a destination.
I like that.
There's no one magic bullet or silver lining that will protect you from all threats. It's about consistently layering your defenses, adapting to new challenges, and always being one step ahead.
Yeah, it's not about achieving this perfect, impenetrable fortress. It's about continuously striving for improvement.
Exactly. And it's not just about the technology either.
Oh, yeah.
It's about the people, processes, and culture within an organization. Everyone, from the CEO to the interns, has a role to play in maintaining a strong security posture.
So it's a team effort. We're all in this together.
Absolutely. And that's what makes cybersecurity so fascinating. It's not just about bits and bytes,
Right.
but about human behavior, risk management, and this constant battle between ingenuity and vulnerability.
This has been a truly incredible deep dive.
Yeah, it has been.
We've gone from the basics of DMZs and firewalls to the cutting edge of cloud security, and I feel like I've gained a whole new perspective.
I'm thrilled to hear that. And I hope our listeners feel the same.
I'm sure they do. Before we wrap up, I do have one final question for you.
Okay.
Based on everything we've discussed today, what's one thing our listeners can do right now to improve their own security awareness or practices?
That's another great question. I would say the most important thing is to simply be aware of the threats that exist.
Yeah.
Don't just bury your head in the sand and assume that you're immune to attacks. Stay informed about the latest security trends. Be cautious about the websites you visit and the emails you open, and always use strong, unique passwords.
Such practical advice. It's often the simplest things that can make the biggest difference.
Exactly. And remember, security is an ongoing process, not a one-time event.
Right.
Stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop learning.
Well said. A huge thank you to our expert guest for sharing such valuable insights with us today.
It was my pleasure.
And to all of you listeners out there, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of DMZ networks, firewalls, and cybersecurity. Until next time, stay safe out there.